started with the photography. I was using actually a piece of software called Gallery at the time, which wasn't very originally named because all it did was create galleries. And so I'd post the photos. My friends would comment on them. It was so much fun. Photomat was actually a pun because that Photomat, spelled F-O-T-O-M-A-T, used to be the place you take your pictures to get developed. So I thought it was a cool play on words. I love puns. There's lots of puns inside of WordPress. I realize they don't translate well, though. And I noticed the captions on my photos started getting longer and longer and longer because I was writing sort of longer stories attached to each one. And I figured, well, might as well start a blog around this. So I searched far and wide. My first blog was on movable type. Fortunately, we can all graduate someday. I ended up switching to some software called B2. Did anyone use B2 here? Has anyone used B2? There's usually at least one person in the room. But that's surprising because B2 only had a few thousand users in the entire world. So this guy is bleeding edge. You should keep an eye on him. B2 was sort of my first experience with PHP, with MySQL databases, with everything like that. And most importantly, it was my first experience with open source. I think I had known the concept of open source before, but I never really participated in it. Another story. In addition to photography, I was really into typography. So the idea of the most elegant way to set words and letters and display them and everything like that is something I'm passionate about to this day. And so one particular typographic annoyance I had was that when you were writing on the web, if you wanted to use a proper apostrophe, which is curved, as opposed to the prime mark, which is up and down, which is what's on the keyboard when you press, you would have to type this long bit of code. So if I was writing the English word don't, I would type D-O-N ampersand hash A217 semicolon T. And that was a little bit of a pain. So I thought computers can do this. So I started working on some code, actually some regular expressions, that would translate normal text, plain text, into typographically correct text. So it would take 3 periods and turn it into ellipsis. It would take single prime marks and turn them into apostrophes. It would take quotes and make them proper quotes. The joke we did at the time was I called this script texturize, which is just sort of a made-up word. But the tagline was texturize. It was so good, it'll make your quotes curl, which some people get. I wrote this code, and I blogged about it, because that's kind of all I did at the time. And the leader of the B2 project, whose name was Michel, lives actually in France, saw this code. He's also a typo nerd and into photography. And he said, hey, you should contribute this to B2. It would be awesome to be part of the project. I had no idea how to do this, where to do this, how a patch worked, how SourceForge worked, anything. But I didn't want him to know this. So I started Googling around and figuring it out. And I contributed my patch to SourceForge, and it was accepted. And I got this utter, complete high, a total thrill with the idea that literally there were dozens of websites around the world running code I had written. This was a very exciting concept. And that thrill has been sort of what's driven, basically my life since then. The idea that, other than that, the idea that someone I'd never met before, on a country I'd never been to, who primarily spoke a language I didn't speak, we could work together to build something, even though my part was very, very small, and that would benefit everybody. The whole idea of open source, right? Now, fast forward probably 6 to 8 months, I became more active in the B2 community. I started posting on the forums, writing little tutorials on my blog, helping my friends get set up with B2. Sort of the standard things you do when you become involved with an open source project. And Michel, who was the leader of the project, disappeared. No one knew what happened. So the members of the B2 community started to wonder. First we were worried, right? We wanted to make sure we were worried something bad had happened to him. And it turns out later we found out he was completely okay. He just kind of wanted to go offline, like Tim was saying. He needed to get off the internet for a little while. But the project was kind of left hanging. No one really knew what was going to happen to it. In fact, the domain was coming up for expiration. So I blogged. I did a blog post. All good things come back to the blog. I called it the blogging software dilemma. I said, well, I'm using B2, but it appears to have been abandoned. I like all these other systems. There was one called Text Pattern. Has anyone heard of Text Pattern here? Oh, there's this. No photos, no photos. And now I guess I'm a lot louder now? Is that good? Okay. Could you hear me at all before? They're just nodding, yeah? Speak English, right? I barely speak English, so. What was I?
Text pattern.
Text Pattern. I love Text Pattern. It was amazing. It was the most beautiful blogging system I'd ever seen. In fact, if Text Pattern was open source, WordPress might not exist today. So I liked Text Pattern, and it was elegant, but it wasn't open source. I liked Movable Type because it had this plugin architecture, but it also wasn't open source, and it was written in Perl, and no one wants to use Perl. I love Blogger because it's the simplicity. I loved all these different systems, but there was nothing that combined them all, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if something combined the best of each of these things? There was another member of the B2 community. His name was Mike Little. Again, someone I had never met in a country I'd never visited. He happened to be in England, and he said, hey, Matt. He left a comment. Matt, if you're serious about this, we should work together. And thus was born WordPress. Just about, I think, 7.5 years ago. I know this because the 7th anniversary of the first release of WordPress was just 2 days ago. So this is kind of like a birthday party for WordPress in Turkey. 7 years old. Wow. So definitely the longest relationship I've ever been in. Now, so what we were able to do was take the B2 code, and we did what was called a fork. So we copied all the code over, and we used that as the base to start building what would become WordPress. Now, that's a very interesting idea in and of itself, because the idea that you could basically take the entirety of the code and not have to start from scratch, you could build on what had already been built, is one of the tenets of open source. So open source, particularly, or as we call it, free software, particularly the GPL, which is the license that WordPress uses, has 4 freedoms. The first is the freedom to be able to use the software for any purpose at all. That means that I can't tell you what you can or cannot do with WordPress or with any piece of GPL software. You can use it to say bad things about me. You could use it to say good things about me, preferably. You could, write about, you could sell it if you wanted. You could, search and replace all the instances of WordPress and call it Turkey Press and, have it make sandwiches. I don't know. You could do all sorts of things. And you're completely 100% free to do whatever you like. Number 2, the second freedom, is the ability to modify the program. So again, you take this for granted with web scripts. But this is not true if you think of most of the software you interact with in your life. Like, for example, let's say you use Microsoft Word, and it doesn't work the way you like, or it has too many buttons and you want to take some out. How do you change that? You can't, because it's like a car that if you open the hood, there's just a big black box there. And so the ability to modify the software is very important. And the third and fourth freedom are basically the ability to share your modifications, to redistribute it without permission, without permission needed, and to share with the world the improvements you make. Now, these 4 freedoms are, I think, one of the most important ideas I've been exposed to in my lifetime, because when you apply these freedoms to software, and if you think how much of our life is going through software now, you get sort of a framework which enables what I think the best alignments between the interest of the developers and the users. And another way of putting that would be that if let's say tomorrow I grew horns, right, and said, WordPress, to use WordPress now you have to send me $5 and only write about how awesome saxophones are or something random. It could be anything. What would happen? Well, someone in this room perhaps would take WordPress and create a fork and say, WordPress is now gone, but we're going to take all the code and build something better. That's beautiful. It's like the ability to have a revolution, but without making a copy of the country. You don't have to actually, because in the internet you have sort of the economics of abundance, and you can make costless copies of anything. So we took the copy of B2, we built what later became WordPress. The happy end to the story is that Michel came back and he was completely okay, And he also said, oh, this is really cool. This is now the official continuation of the V2 project. So we had a happy ending there. And WordPress started to grow. It grew actually very, very slowly. In the beginning, we had more developers than users. There were more people working on the software than actually using it, which is a little embarrassing. So I would set up blogs for all my friends, basically. My friends who weren't necessarily technical, they were artists or musicians or things like that. So I set up the first 5 or 6 WordPress blogs with them. And this was very helpful to me, very influential, because I saw how non-tech people interact with the software. And so it became obvious that there's certain things we took for granted as technological people were perhaps too difficult, or we made too many assumptions about how things should work. So it became a long process, which is still ongoing, of making the software simpler, more elegant, and more intuitive to use, which have really been some of the driving forces behind the development of WordPress over the past 7 years and, I believe, 13 major releases that we've done since then. WordPress grew very organically, sort of just a little bit at a time. And I think as of today, it does 50,000 downloads per day. So just while we're talking, there'll be a few thousand people downloading it. And we estimate that it runs about 8.5% of the entire web. So that's come a long way from my dorm room in Houston. Actually, I didn't have a dorm room, so I guess just my mom's kitchen in Houston to where it is today. And the beauty of that story is that at the time, I really hadn't taken any computer science courses. I still haven't. My background was not as a programmer. It was really more as a musician. But it doesn't matter, because in open source, it's what's called a meritocracy. So basically, the idea that whoever has the most merit, or in reality, whoever works the hardest on something, ends up becoming the leaderships of the project. Just like because I contributed to B2 and put a lot of work into WordPress, I was sort of the leader of WordPress. But in reality, there's thousands and thousands of people that contribute to WordPress. Around 1,500 were active in the past year in terms of modifying the code and everything. And if it wasn't for them, none of you would be here. I wouldn't be here. It's really a much larger community that builds something. And the beautiful part is that we're able to create something that's greater than the sum of our individual contributions. And I feel like that's the most important thing for WordPress going forward, is that we continue to collaborate and work together and keep the spirit of open source alive in everything we do. Even as WordPress becomes more popular and there's more commercial plugins around it and premium things and stuff like that, it's important that we keep the GPL at the core of everything that is WordPress and also everything built on top of WordPress. So that was sort of my introduction to where WordPress is. That was pretty much it. We can go to Q&A, and I'm sure someone will ask about WordPress 3.0. And I'm really happy to be in Turkey, so thank you all for coming out.
Is there a commercial, firm having WordPress? Who is the owner of WordPress?
That's a good question. So is there a commercial firm around WordPress? So for WordPress.org, no. So .org is an independent entity. In the past year, I actually set up a nonprofit foundation, I guess what's sometimes called an NGO here, called the Wordpress Foundation. And the idea is to have the WordPress trademark, the code, everything like that, exist in a nonprofit so it can continue in perpetuity, regardless of what happens to me or anything else. About 4 years ago, I started a company called Automatic. Automatic makes WordPress.com, which is the hosted version of the software. We make Akismet, PullDaddy, Gravatar, and Debate, After the Deadline, a number of different sort of software services which make us money. So, for example, on WordPress.com, it's free to use, but you could buy a domain name for $15 a year. And if you do, that goes into the company, and we hire more people to work on WordPress. So it works out pretty well. But there's actually, there's not just one company behind WordPress. Although that's my company, and it's one of the largest, there's many, many different organizations that end up contributing, including major media like New York Times, CNN, CNET.
Did any venture capital came for acquiring WordPress?
Not for WordPress, but for Automatic, which is, again, a separate entity. We did 2 rounds of fundraising, so we did raise some capital, mostly with the intention of, my goal from the beginning has always been to create a sustainable business. And so it made sense, because we were growing so quick, to make proactive investments in infrastructure, servers, people, acquiring companies like we did with Poldaddy and Gravatar and IntensDebate. Just good investments. And in that case, raising money is a good idea. What's your name?
My name is Fatma.
Cool. I think everyone should say their name before you ask a question.
Thank you for coming here. And how many blogs do you have?
Me personally?
No.
Like 10 million.
On the WordPress. Yes, thank you. On the WordPress, do you keep statistics of that?
Uh-huh.
You have, I think. And also, do you keep the statistics that what's the most popular type of blog, or the type of or subject in blogs people have?
I would say the most popular...
Starting and also now.
Probably the most popular topic for bloggers is themselves. But we don't have official stats around that, so I can't give you any good data there. We do have a general idea of how many WordPresses there are in the world, though. We think that's around 23 million right now, and it goes up. This year we'll probably add another, probably until the end of the year, another 8 or 9 million to that. So it's growing pretty quickly.
English or local?
That's all the blogs that we check. I don't have any stats specific to Turkish, but if you email me, I'll look those up. That would be cool to know as well. Our stats are a little broken right now, so the numbers are rough.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. How about in the back?
Am I Şegül?
Uh-huh.
In your conversation, you talked about the economic of abundance,
Uh-huh.
which I'm really interested in, like all the changes going around in internet right now. I think also open source changed a lot the economic of abundance that we are living. On the other hand, we are like living in a system which is economic of scarcity at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know the value system that we are living right now, which is based on money. So like in a way, free is like valueless. But on the other hand, like we are really living in a maybe a change period. Like free is not valueless in the internet, but there are a lot of discussions going on around this in internet as well.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking like open source really brought all this big idea of economic of abundance to our world right now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think like the people who are contributing in the open source, the programmers, what are their real revenue from them? Not the money waste just, but and I am also like maybe it's a stupid question because I don't really
There's no
know.
stupid questions.
Okay. I know that because of the time asking. But just it's pleasure just to say. But anyway, like there is like a business model for the programmers in the open source system, like they're earning money from it, or like just like another kind of satisfaction that they have at the end.
Sure. So I guess there's a two-part question. Why do people contribute to open source, and how do those contributors make money? I think it starts, most people contribute to open source for exactly how I described myself in the beginning. And that there's something that they're interested in, something they're passionate about, and because it's fun. Like I code for fun. I really enjoy it. I don't get as much chance to do it anymore, but now like I'll code on weekends. It's like kind of my idea of a good time. So that's it. I think that intrinsic motivation of having an impact on the world, working with people that are fun, maybe learning things by contributing to an open source project. For example, WordPress has some of the best PHP developers I've ever met in the world. If you start to get active in the project and contribute a piece of code, you'll have some of the best developers in the world review your code and then maybe give you feedback on it and things like that. So that can be a really just satisfying experience. Into what do the developers do to make money? Most of the time in open source, they don't have an explicit monetization or way of getting money directly from the code they're writing. They're doing it more for fun. But often they'll have something else than the code that provides for their family. So just when I think of the different WordPress developers, one just works for a different company. He works on, I think, like embedded systems that control air conditioning in airports and stuff. And so he just does this at nights and weekends for fun. Another guy has become a full-time WordPress consultant. So he works on WordPress, and then clients hire him because he's the WordPress guy to build their websites and to do consulting and things like that. Myself, I started a company to create some services around WordPress, hosted services that we could give away for free, but also derive value from. So there's really as many different models as there are possible businesses. And I feel like people gravitate to whatever gives them the most satisfaction. For a lot of folks, they might not even want to, like as a photographer, I would never want to be like a wedding photographer, for example, because it seems like it would be really stressful. Like, you know, have you ever seen that show Bridezilla? Do they have that here?
Yeah.
With the crazy brides, and you know, and then you're like someone's most important day of their life. Hopefully, they're only going to do it once, you know, and you're responsible for chronicling that. To me, that would be really stressful. So even though I love photography, I wouldn't want to do it professionally. And I think maybe that's true for some of the folks that are involved. But by and far and large, the saying in open source is scratch your own itch. So the idea that if you want something, for example, there's over 10,000 plugins for WordPress. Now, the vast majority of those were people just writing a plugin because they wanted WordPress to do something. And they release it because why not? You know? And that's kind of cool.
My name is Oğuzhan. You said there have been 1,500 developers working for WordPress for the open source project. Has any other developer started a company like WordPress? I mean, taken this code?
Yeah.
Something else?
Oh, like WordPress.com?
Yeah, like WordPress.com.
Yeah. So there's edu blogs is another blog hosting service. The software that runs WordPress.com we release as well, so anyone can create a competitor, which is kind of counterintuitive. Like, why would you take everything that you work so hard and invest in and give it away so someone could create something to compete with you? And I think it doesn't matter. It's a big world out there. And for example, someone could maybe do a better job in Turkey than we do and do a fantastic blog hosting service here. Every time I go to a WordCamp, I meet often dozens, sometimes over 100 people who make their living around or with WordPress. Often it's the most common by and large is consulting, so building websites for people using WordPress. But you also have people who sell themes, premium themes. You have other blog hosting services. You have hosting companies, for example, that just provide hosting. There's a very, very large ecosystem around what we do now, probably approaching $1 billion if you added it all up in total. And that's pretty neat.
Actually, I would like to ask more specifically. I mean, if somebody else did start a company like WordPress.com as a competitor, what do you think are your major success drivers for yourself or for WordPress? What differentiates you among others? And how do you define yourself? Why is WordPress so successful among others who started similar?
So is the question, I'm not sure I understand. So why is WordPress successful, or what if someone took the code? What was the...
My question is, actually, if someone else started a company like...
oh, I see.
Among the other developers, I mean, with the open source code, why do you think this WordPress is more successful than others? I mean,
we work really hard at it. We laugh, but I think that's really important. My favorite thing about the internet is that it creates a huge equality of opportunity. It doesn't matter your backgrounds, what color you are, how tall or short you are, how small or large. You're really judged on the basis of your contributions and your ideas. And I think that it's one of the most exciting things for me being just in this world is that anyone could start an amazing website using WordPress or writing their own software very easily for basically $0. Because I had $0 when it all got started. And particularly with regards to publishing, I like the idea because some of our biggest users are like the New York Times and everything. And everyone in this room, I assume you use WordPress. Otherwise, you're in the wrong room. Uses the exact same software that the New York Times does to publish their blog. That's like if 100 years ago you had in your living room the same amount of presses and paper and ink and trucks to deliver it that the New York Times did. It'd be inconceivable. On the internet, we just take it for granted. And I think that's sort of, you're a click away from almost everyone in the world. And that's pretty exciting. So I believe that makes it even more important to do the other things that other people aren't going to do, which is just work really freaking hard on things and devote yourself to it. and love what you do.
My name is Hakan. You shared with us a brief summary of your last 7 years. But during this period, is there any certain events that accelerated WordPress popularity? Maybe some funny events that created an increase in the popularity?
Sure. So was there anything that sort of made WordPress a lot more popular, or a tipping point is what people commonly ask? We did have one early on. There was a major competitor to WordPress was movable type. And when we entered the market, movable type probably had 95% market share. So they were really dominant at the time. They decided to change their licensing, where previously it had been free for most people. People were going to have to pay to upgrade. And the upgrade they were doing, which was version 3.0, funnily enough, didn't really add any user features. It was a developer upgrade. So you had a combination of, they were asking you to pay for something that didn't add any features and might break plugins and things like that. So people got pretty angry. And a lot of them, there were some great blog entries written and everything like that. But actually what happened was people realized that this is one of the dangers of proprietary software. So in open source, like I said, I can't take the software away from you. I can't change your ability to use it. I can't say, now it costs $5 or $500 or $5,000. And with proprietary software, you can. I mean, you as a user, you have no rights. You have basically no control over your destiny or your life or your future with proprietary software, because it's at the whims of the developer. They can change it at any time. So people really realized that this was a danger, because until it happens, you don't really care about it, because it's free enough, right? It's open enough, you don't really notice. But when they changed the license, people were like, wow, we need an open source alternative. Very luckily, WordPress 1.0 came out a week later. That had a perfect movable type importer. So it was able to import all your content and redirect all your entries and everything like that. So that was, in some ways, very fortunate timing. So that gave us definitely a prominence bump. It was sort of the first press that WordPress got. We had some prominent people like Mark Pilgrim switch over. But at the time, when I look at it, we went from 100 downloads a day to 300 downloads a day. And ever since then, it's just been a very slow and steady organic climb. And I think that's actually a fantastic way to build a business, to build software, to build everything, because it gives you the ability to scale naturally. By that I mean that if we had gotten super huge overnight, we probably would have broken a lot of things because we weren't ready for it. But because we've been able to grow over the past 7 years, we've been able to put in place the foundations, a strong foundation to build the rest of the house on. Hopefully one we can build a skyscraper on. Thank you.
My name is Tark. On Wikipedia, it says you dropped out of college to work for CNET on WordPress, and then you left CNET to work on WordPress full time. Was WordPress already very popular at that time when you dropped out of college, or would you consider yourself a risk taker for these easy decisions at that time?
So the question was on Wikipedia. It says I dropped out of school, which is true. Some things on Wikipedia are true, and then I quit the job I had taken. So actually, dropping out of school. Well, first of all, stay in school if you're in school. I decided to drop out because I had gone to visit San Francisco to visit a friend, actually, who is Turkish, named Tantek Çelik. He's better known now as the founder of microformats and everything like that. But at the time, I just knew him from a conference I had gone to, and he invited me out to spend a week with him in San Francisco. Now, I grew up, born and raised in Houston, Texas. I'm not sure what the Turkish equivalent of Houston, Texas would be, but Houston is very hot. You drive everywhere, there's traffic, there's not too much technology going on, actually. There wasn't a huge web community, for example. But my family was there and I loved it. But when I got to San Francisco, it was amazing. It went from 100 degrees. What's the Celsius equivalent of that?
40.
40?
38, 40.
40 in Houston, and I got off the plane. It was 25 or something beautiful. Is 25 a comfortable temperature?
still hot.
Still hot?
In my opinion.
Oh, still hot. Like this, but cooler.
20,
Right,
20,
so
22.
I stepped off the plane. I was like, "There's free air conditioning everywhere." You just roll down the window. It's the most amazing thing. And then, I got to. It was maybe because I was staying with Tantec, but I got to meet all the people who had built the things that I was crazy about. And this guy, one of the people I met was Doug Bowman, who at the time had just done the redesign of Wired. Now he's the lead designer of Twitter. I met Ev, who at the time had founded Blogger, and later went on to found ODO and then Twitter, and all these sorts of amazing people. And I was just like, wow, this is just, I got to get here, I got to get here. But I went back to school. But I had visited a lot of companies when I went to San Francisco. It was kind of funny. My first experience, I was a week there. I didn't see the Golden Gate Bridge or Alcatraz or any of the things you normally see when you go to San Francisco. But I did visit Yahoo and Google and CNET and all these other places. And when I went back, they started contacting me and said, would you be interested in working? Do you want to apply for a job? And all of those, the CNET was the most interesting opportunity because, like a Yahoo or Google is a technology company. So when you work there, they want to own the intellectual property of everything you create. CNET was a media company, so meaning that their business was making content and selling ads against it. They almost didn't really care about the software, so they allowed me to retain the intellectual property rights for all the things I was writing, all the open source software I was creating. And it was a job where I'd be making as much as my dad. So I was like, well, I could stay in school 2 more years and hope to get a job like this, or I could maybe take the opportunity now and move out to San Francisco. So that was actually not risky at all in some way. Although my parents would have preferred me to stay in school. And honestly, I kind of wish I had finished. I just had basically a year and a half left, so, but it worked out. Leaving CNET was tough because I had spent, well, kind of a year before I went, like talking my mom into the idea that I was going to leave home and everything like that. But it's okay because it was going to be part of a public company with like hundreds of or thousands of employees and a healthcare plan and all this sort of stuff. And then like 8 months later, I'm like, remember all that stuff? I'm going to leave all that too. And it was a little tricky. It was a hard sell. But luckily, my parents have always been very supportive of everything I've done. And so they were like, well, okay, if you know what you're doing. And WordPress was getting pretty popular then. In fact, that was one of the reasons I wanted to leave, was because it seemed like there were such big opportunities. Basically, the idea was, the thesis for the company, was that WordPress was popular among people who were technically savvy. So you would download it. If you know how to set up a database and FTP the files up and those sorts of configurations, people liked it. And we were curious that if we made it sort of one-click easy to get started with WordPress, would it work? Would it grow in popularity? The answer was yes, and that's been sort of the deal.
And when you started working on WordPress, did you see it as a business opportunity from start, or
not at all?
Was it just a project you worked on and then?
It was really just for my own personal amusement and use. And the fact that other people used it has been a pleasant surprise. Cool. How about over here? Ladies first.
My name is Mübeye. I've noticed that a lot of reblogging websites choose WordPress on the basis that they are not afraid of their content, their snarky content being pulled off. So and so is good friends with the guy who founded this other company. And listening to you in person, you made it very clear that you are not building or running WordPress on fear of competitors, on fear of failure, on fear of whatever you may fear. Rather,
Spiders.
Hidden things, all those things. But I mean, what are you doing to protect this, apart from the Wordpress Foundation? That there won't be a fake moment for you. That every 10 days there are new privacy regulations going out, and people just can't get out of it. But there is no alternative either. So.
It's a tricky question.
Like
you haven't screwed up yet. How are you going to not screw up in the future? I don't know. I think it all comes back to first principles. So what do you believe in? I strongly believe in open source. And I think that as long as we stay open source, that sort of almost builds in a checks and balances that prevents us from doing a lot of stupid things. So that's nice. You know, even when I have a bad day, I can only do so much stupid stuff. And then 2, and everyone says this, but it's sort of one of those things that everyone says and no one actually really does, but listening to your community and your users. To the extent WordPress has been successful thus far, it's been because it's been driven by you guys, you know, the people here in this room. And that's, if we can stay true to that and continue building that way, I think we'll continue to grow. That's actually the reason why WordPress sort of has been moving into the CMS space. So it started as just blogging software. Now more than half the new users of WordPress don't use it for a blog at all. They use it to power a regular website. And people are doing just beautiful, amazing websites. Really complex, really big, powerful things that, you know, 5 years ago you would have needed a real CMS, like a Drupal or a Joomla or something like that. And now they're building it with WordPress. So that was basically a result. That wasn't like my idea for WordPress when it first started. In fact, almost nothing we'd have done. It was the first idea. But it's something that people told us very strongly that they wanted, and they started to do it. So we started to build support, a little bit at a time. I think you were next.
7 years ago, you created WordPress as a blogging software.
Mm-hmm.
And today, a lot of users using WordPress as a content management software.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define WordPress? As a blogging software or as a content management software?
Well, I guess a deeper question would be, how do I define content management software? Historically, CMSs have meant software that's really hard to use and sucks and has the whole kitchen sink thrown in. Like it's got like 50 screens and makes 80 database tables and just does really, really complex things. But the idea is that it does everything, and so people will choose it. In reality, it ends up doing nothing well, sort of being a jack of all trades, master of none. How I think of WordPress is shifting that a little bit. I actually sometimes refer to WordPress as a content management kernel. Much in the same idea as like an operating system as a kernel. WordPress is in the very middle. We want to be small, light, fast, easy to use, and most importantly, modular. So the idea that there's the 10,000 plugins that are available to do the kitchen sink. You know, whatever weird thing you want to do on your site, you can sort of pick the plugin that enables you to do that. And the beauty of that is that we don't have to build all those features in. Like WordPress doesn't need to get super bloated to have as many users as we do. We can keep the core really small and light, and then have plugins that serve the needs of different communities. So a plugin to turn it into a store or e-commerce. There's a plugin to sort of do collaborative editing of a book. There's a plugin to do pretty much anything you can imagine, and most things you wouldn't imagine. And that is sort of the vision of WordPress, and also where it's been successful. These are all sort of answers to your question, like why has WordPress been successful? So everything I've said is kind of still answering your question. Does that sound good? Cool. And right in front.
Hello, my name is Bülent, and I'm wondering what do you think about what's going to happen to internet in 5 or 10 years, and what's your plan with your company?
So what's going to happen to the internet in 5 or 10 years? That's also a difficult one because 10 years ago WordPress did not exist. So the internet can change pretty quickly in relatively short periods of time. The trends that I see, certain super trends, so basically things that are undeniable forces, and I don't know exactly how they're going to play out. I'm not that smart, but I do know that there's going to be something there. The biggest I'm most excited about from the point of view of WordPress is the coming of HTML5. So basically the idea is the web as an application platform, moving away from the pure document model, which we've been stuck in since the web started. Mobile, so the idea that you have some sort of device with you all the time, and it knows where you are, it knows who you are, it has an always-on internet connection that's very fast, it's a touch interface of some sort, not a keyboard or mouse-driven interface. That's going to be a pretty big deal. Has anyone used the iPad here? You can play with mine later. I'll let people play with it. It's amazing. Like, that thing blows my mind. I feel like sometimes when I use gadgets, I feel like I'm in the future. Right? Like, you remember Star Trek? They'd have the little pad they type on? That's the iPad. So that's awesome. And you just kind of realize once you use it, you're like, wow, someday every computer in the world is going to work like this. And so how do I, as Wayne Gretzky, who's a hockey player, says, I go to where the puck is going to be. Right? So how do I position myself there? With WordPress, we've been focusing very heavily on mobile apps. Right now, it's a very fragmented market. It's kind of like the web 15 years ago when you'd have to build like something for each browser. Right now, you have to build something for every app platform. So we have a BlackBerry app, Nokia apps being worked on, iPhone, obviously, iPad, Android, all of these things. And it's wasteful. Right? Why do I have to write 5 different applications from scratch? I have a web version. It's pretty good. Or can't we all just use that? But for now, you have to sort of play the game of the app stores.
And what do you think about the new Google web app stores?
The web app stores?
Yeah.
Oh, with Chrome and everything like that. I think it's an interesting idea. To me, on the web, you don't really need an app store, which is the beauty of it. But as we shift to more of an application model, I think it's kind of cool to have a directory. You know, in the beginning, you start with directories and then you move to search, just like Yahoo starts a directory and then we all move to Google search. In the beginning days, it's kind of cool to have a directory that lists all of the software in the world. And hopefully 10 years from now, we'll think, how quaint that we used to have a directory that listed all the software available for the iPhone. Because now there's millions of things available and you don't even know most of them. That would be a world I would be much more excited about living in than these closed models. It's been interesting, actually. All of our mobile apps are open source. And it's been difficult. Although WordPress, like I said, has 1,500 contributors, the mobile apps basically have 0 contributors. And the question is, why is this? And there's a number of reasons, but I think part of it is that it's difficult to build an open source project on a closed source platform. WordPress can be open source all the way down. It could be Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. You can run it on Windows that you want, but I mean, it's really built on open source. We're standing on the shoulders, not the sodas, of giants. And in the mobile world, that's just not true yet.
Like you said, WordPress is a very simple install process,
Mm-hmm.
and just one step. But with the 3.0 merged with WordPress Mule, and
Mm-hmm.
it gets a new navigation system, and WordPress is getting a little chubby in the code.
It's okay. We're going to read Tim's book and trim it right up.
And developers try to make it a little lighter because
Mm-hmm.
of
The memory limits.
hosting systems
Yep.
memory limits. So are you going to develop a semi-automatic install system? Like after the first step, people may choose a variety of themes or
Mhm.
plugins. Do you consider this future plan?
Sure. Yes. Well, excuse me. Let me talk about 3.0 for a minute, actually, because I think, well, just out of curiosity, well, who here runs WordPress.org? So runs your own WordPress. And who runs WordPress.com? Raise your hands. Okay, cool. Of the people on WordPress, is everyone on the latest version, like 2.92? Is anyone not on the latest version? Older versions? Okay. Help those people out so you can get upgrade. You're in the right place if you want to upgrade. So 3.0 is a pretty major release. We're adding, as you mentioned, the merge of multi-user, or MU WordPress, with regular WordPress. That's more of a geeky feature, but basically the software that runs WordPress.com is now going to be completely merged with the WordPress you download. So you can use WordPress to run one site or 10 million with the same install, which is kind of cool when you think about it. We're adding a menu editor. So the idea that if you have a theme and it's got a menu, you can edit it. It sounds simple, but it's been so hard to do. Because basically, as we move to being more of a content management system, people want to be able to use WordPress to edit the entire site, right? Not have to go into code at all. And so this is something that takes that to another level. What else was there? WordPress 3.0.
Custom page formats.
Oh, yeah, custom post types. So you can have, right now WordPress has posts and pages. In 3.0 you can create post types for events. You can create a post type for anything you like. You could create a post type called dogs and have, every entry in the database be a different type of dog. And that could have custom fields attached to it, so arbitrary metadata. It can have taxonomies attached to it. It's pretty powerful stuff. Basically, you can use WordPress now to create almost any website in the world, which is kind of cool when you think about it. And then the thing that made it bigger, and the thing that I had worked on personally, which is the 2010 theme. So WordPress has had the same default theme. You know the Kubrick with the big blue gradients, header, and it was really sexy when we first did it. But now it's getting a little long in the tooth. It's been there for 5 years, and we are finally doing a new theme, and it's called 2010. We are calling it that because that way we'll make a new theme every year. So in 2011, we have to do a new one. And we'll be embarrassed about the old name, hopefully enough to make a new one. 2010 is kind of fun because it shows off a lot of the new capabilities in WordPress. So it has a built-in drop-down menu, so yeah, a really nice sort of menu that you can edit, of course. It's got custom headers. You can actually override the custom header on a per page or per post level. So let's say you have your About page and you want like a picture of you on that, but on your home page you want a picture of the sky. You can do that now. And then you can also have custom backgrounds. Now, part of what made the download big was we included a bunch of default custom headers. So I believe 8 photos that are actually photos I took. And that they add up to about 800K of space, which is, when WordPress as a whole, that's I think now about 10% of the total download, the uncompressed download size. And oh, there was one more. Oh, the coolest thing in 2010 that you guys should check out is it has built-in post types for asides and galleries. So basically, if you see what I do on my site, oh, this is a good time to plug my site. If you go to ma.tt, that's my website, and you'll see I do some posts with titles, which are longer, some posts which are really short and have no title, I call them asides, and then some posts which are just have a picture, and you click on it and you see a whole gallery of photos. That's all built into WordPress, and now it's built into the 2010 theme, which is pretty cool. You can also follow me on Twitter at Photomat, friend feed at Photomat, and Facebook at matt.mullenweg. Okay, plugging done. So those are the things. In terms of the automatic upgrade, I'm not worried about it because we can work with the host, and it's sort of a one-time thing. There's a few things about, we've managed to get the size down by taking out the importers, for example, and making those all plugins, by removing some vestigial code that we don't need anymore, some old JavaScript libraries. So we've gotten the size down to a reasonable level. So I'm not worried about it anymore. Everyone going to upgrade to 3.0? It's coming home. We just released the first release candidate, I think 2 days ago, on the 7th birthday of WordPress. So hopefully it is pretty close. And time to start translating. Will there be a Turkish translation ready? Oh, you did it already? Man, you're making us look bad. This guy's working hard. Thank you.
I'm Burak, and the media is changing. What is your opinion about social media and the new kind of business models online?
Well, in terms of how media is changing, I think that the nicest shift in sort of the media business model is that we're no longer cutting down trees, taking them into paper, printing huge things, and then delivering it by hand to people's doors every day. I mean, that's a pretty inefficient model when you think about it. Like if someone came to me with that business proposal, we're going to cut down whole forest, print it out, then hand deliver it to everyone, and then put all the, every day, throw away all of our inventory. I mean, that's pretty crazy when you think about it, when you just sort of look at newspapers from a disinterested third-party point of view. So just new blogging publishers, I think of them like micro-publishers, like a TechCrunch, Wordpress, sorry, Wordpress, Gigaom, all these sorts of things. They're basically creating new publishing empires without any of the vestigial cost or burden of this old model, this dead tree model, if you will. The problem is that the money has not caught up with that yet. So you have a situation where, you know, why do we do all this crazy stuff? Well, because you can sell ads in this bundling, this distribution that you give to people. They actually lose money on your subscription most of the time, but they make it up in advertising. And although people's attention, like of my peers, almost none of them read a physical newspaper anymore, but they all visit NewYorkTimes.com. And the attention is shifting dramatically to online, but the advertising dollars have not yet shifted all the way. They're like 10% of the way. So it's a little ahead of it, but that's okay. Because if you just imagine, even if half the dollars that are currently spent on print shift to online world, it something like quadruples the online state of advertising. So you have a lot of opportunities for content creators and content producers and people who are blogging and everything to derive a meaningful income from purely their content alone, which I think is a good model because they can focus on it, right? Everyone wins in that. The advertisers subsidize something.
Free internet.
The free internet. Yeah. Does that make sense? So someone do that. Well, hopefully you're all doing it in some way. But ultimately, the reasons why I blog, I actually took ads off my blog like 4 or 5 years ago. It's just because I felt like, although it makes money, right? And any money is better than no money. I felt like I was losing something in terms of how my audience was engaged. Like, why was I showing these ads to my audience when all the ads exist to send people someplace else? And really, I want them to, if I want to send them someplace else, I want it to be something I've endorsed, or a link I've given them, or something I'm talking about, or article. And I thought of it more, the lack of advertising was more of a investment I was making in my audience, that the site will load just a little bit faster, just be a little bit less cluttered. And most importantly, the rewards for me of blogging are intrinsic. It's the comments, it's the interactions I have, it's the people I meet, all those sorts of things really make blogging worth it for me. I mean, right, someone like Tim, who is a very well-known author and could, in theory, like you said, write something for The Economist and make a lot of money for it. Why would he do something for free on his blog? Well, because it feels good. That's beautiful.
What was the key reason of Arda Kutsal from Meritocracy? What was the key reason of those acquisitions of Gravatar and Paul Daddy? What was the key reason of those acquisitions? And also, is there any more next coming acquisitions? I know you're not going to tell
I would like to announce that Wordpress Turkey.
But is there any startup that you say, oh, I wish I had that, or this should be our, this field should be our next playing
Sure.
area?
So in terms of why we did our previous acquisition, generally what happens is because we work on WordPress and because we run so many blogs, I think 11 million now ourselves, we have a very good insight into what bloggers want, and by proxy, what websites want in the world. So when we see demand for something or usage of something, sometimes it makes sense to be in that area. So PollDaddy is a good example of that. We saw a huge growth and demand for polls and surveys, and so we looked at the market. We thought, well, should we build our own? Found PollDaddy, which was sort of like the WordPress of the polling world, and said, maybe we can make something work here. So I went to Ireland, got them really drunk on Guinness, and yeah, we woke up together. Not like that, people. Come on.
So they were friendly as well. It's Turkish.
But it made a lot of strategic sense. So after the acquisition of PollDaddy, we were able to put what we're good at, scaling, building web scale services. So we rewrote PollDaddy in PHP and MySQL, and then we were able to cross-promote it on WordPress.com. And actually, PollDaddy was the fastest service we've ever done to get to 1 billion page views. And actually, they're about to pass 2 billion page views just a few months later. So the growth there can be really, really fast in a short amount of time once we get the infrastructure in place. And that's the same thing for all of these. So Gravatar, awesome service that was basically declining in usage because it went down all the time. So we thought, well, we're good at this. We can take images and serve them. And now I think we serve 20 billion Gravatars per day. So there's a lot of them out there, and it just works fine. So I like services like that.
So in other new fields, I mean, like microblogging maybe?
We are doing some acquisitions. We have one pending. It should be announced very soon. I guess I can't announce it today.
It's your birthday, so come on.
It's your birthday. You sound like 50 Cent. Go shorty, it's your birthday.
WordPress is going to break the news. And also, I'm a TechCrunch writer as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm a TechCrunch writer, so I can break the news now.
So nothing to announce right here. But yeah, I I love the web, and I use lots of it. No, I mean, I really do. I love spending time on websites, and sometimes I see services that are either inspiring and give me ideas for things I want to do with WordPress. So examples like the new blogging companies like Tumblr, Postures, those sorts of things, definitely have given some inspiration. And sometimes...
Those companies.
What's that?
I was going to ask for
Oh, okay.
Tumblr and Postures.
Yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff. And again, if we can apply some of those ideas to WordPress, they'll be at a much, much larger scale. So we can get a lot of usage of these things. In terms of, what was the other part of the question? Oh, I also see other services that I think would be great complements to WordPress. So, yeah, I always keep my eye out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you want some alcohol?
Some alcohol? Yeah, is there some Rocky here? I think we had a question over in this area. I don't remember exactly where. Oh, there.
You know, there's a fight against Adobe especially or the HTML5 also. What do you think about that?
So Flash versus HTML5. And I think that it's been funny to watch Apple versus Adobe, because they're both sort of trying to claim to be open, and they're both like the most closed companies in the world. I mean, Apple says, "I'll do your video in H.264," which is a proprietary codec that they own some of the patents on, and things like that. I mean, ultimately, it's not any more open, which is why Google acquired Onto, and then most recently, open source VP8 to sort of be the successor to Ogg Theora. So, to some extent, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's just the companies, these giant companies who are really proprietary at their core, fighting with each other. HTML5 gets mixed up in this, but it really has nothing to do with the fight between Adobe and Apple. There's nothing intrinsic about the video tag to HTML5 or anything about that. You could play open source video using Flash, or you could play proprietary video using HTML5. So they're actually disconnected. Now, what's going to win? Well, the web wins. If you look over the long term, the web always wins. You know, you have what I feel like there's cycles of closed and openness. So, for example, the first cycle of closeness would be maybe AOL. The second cycle would be maybe Facebook. And you have, I believe we're somewhere near the peak of that. And now we're going to start to go back towards open, because people have been burned a little bit and realize the need for standards, web standard technologies, for us to have a level playing field. And I think this is going to be driven by the competition in browsers, which we have not had for a long time. The browser world is pretty interesting right now. You've got Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer duking it out. And that's pretty fun. Like, as a web guy, that makes me really excited.